One of the things that might be helpful is to talk a little bit about personal statements. And I thought that what we could potentially do is spend a little bit of time. I'm happy to talk about some of my own kind of views of personal statements, but then this can be also a conversation. So if there's some specific things that you've been thinking about, questions that you have, I'm happy to try to answer those as well. And so you can imagine, I think that personal statements are I think really. I'll maybe start a little philosophically. They're an opportunity for you to provide some information to people that's really about you, and it really gives them the opportunity to kind of think about. I would say maybe there's maybe three main objectives that you want to try to accomplish in your personal statement. The first two are linked, and then the third one is a little bit separate. So the first two, I think, are really a little bit about who you are and where and what your journey has been so far. And then the second part is along that, keeping that theme, is where do you want to go? Where what are you trying to accomplish, and what are you doing? And by reference to that, it's supposed to give them an opportunity to figure out, like, if you've done, these collective experiences and you see yourself moving in this direction, it gives the people who are reading these an opportunity to figure out whether they think they have the resources, the environment, and the opportunities for you to be able to achieve your goals during that time. And so it's really gives you an opportunity to kind of think about that. I would say that, generally speaking, especially as it relates to residency, many people will include some component of why they want to do clinical medicine. What is the thing that has attracted to them, and why are they willing to invest the amount of time that they want to go into clinical medicine? But I don't think that that should in and of itself dominate your entire personal statement. I do think that there's things that you want to be able to try to also include. And then the other part I would say is people love stories, right? So yes, you have, your GPA. Yes, you have your CV. Yes, you have your papers. Yes, you have your collective experiences. But how does that actually come together as a story? Like, how is it that you can kind of weave where you've been and where you're going? And so I think that if you can create that and meld that into, let's say, using a clinical event to kind of move some of those advances forward, I think it's particularly helpful to be able to do it that way. The second part, or the third pillar of this, is really to give you an opportunity to explain something that may require some level of explanation. If there's a score, if there's a part of the, if you had applied before and you didn't get in, if there was a score that was particularly low and you retook the exam, there's things that are there that there's two ways to approach that. One is, let's hope they don't pay attention to that, and let's maybe guess that they aren't going to worry too much about that. I will say that's not a really good way of kind of approaching that, only because when you don't address it, they'll fill in the blanks for you, right? So give you an example. Like if you were, you had your record, you went to medical school, you did 2 years of research, and then 2 years there's no record of what you did, and now you're doing your second research experience for a year and you're applying. Let's say there's that 2-year gap, and you don't say anything about that 2-year gap. People are going to assume you were a bartender on a beach somewhere, or you were a mass murderer, in a different country, or something like, they'll fill in the blanks because you didn't tell them what you were doing. They're going to make some assumptions as to what you were doing, and then none of that actually adds up. And so that makes somebody who's looking at an application like that a little bit worried. So gaps probably need to be addressed. If there's a shortcoming, if there was some irregularity in your thing, you need to address it, and you need to be upfront about it in those particular situations, because they're going to notice. It's not like you can try to pull a fast one on individuals to be able to know that, and then you need to recognize that you can use that. And I always use those opportunities to kind of like turn that into a positive. Like, so if you did, let's say, have to take time off, but you took time off because it was important for your family, I think it's okay. Say that. People are human. We understand that, that people have to do that. If you applied and you didn't get in and you were applying again, just say that this is my dream and I'm really these are the things that I did to try to improve my application, and I really, this is my passion, and I want to keep trying to get training in the United States. So I think that you need to be able to turn something, if there is something that you need to focus in on your application, to turn that kind of from something where you were hoping they're not paying attention to something where you're going to be able to address it and answer it kind of on your own terms. Unfortunately, as a personal statement, as you know, it's not really a what would you call it? It's not a conversation. This is your opportunity to say something, but you can't engage in a dialogue. Your goal really is to be able to have an opportunity to interview, because once in the interview process, you'll be able to kind of go back and forth with people to have that conversation, if there's something there, or if you've weaved it so that you've told them where you were and where you're going. The details of some of those can come out in a 30-minute interview, so you have the opportunities to do that. So in my mind, what you really want to do in this personal statement is really try to focus that. And I guess and then a corollary to that is remember who's reading it, right? So if you ever write a personal statement, or if you ever write a document of any kind, one of the most important things you need to know is, like, who is your audience, right? If you're writing an article for the Boston Globe, you know who the audience is going to be. But if you write it for a scientific paper, that's a different audience. And if you now, if you're writing it for this, you need to know who that audience is. And so it's usually the residents. For a residency, it's usually a residency program director who's going to read it, or an associate program director, and sometimes the chief of medicine. And so they will have read many of these, and so they have a sense as to what they can say. If anybody does kind of like systems based, they can do kind of like bulk transcriptomics on these personal statements, and they can say, like, this personal statement fits into this phenotype, this one fits here, this one fits here, because they'll have the opportunities to kind of see some of those things. But you also want to be able to kind of make sure that there's a little bit of a personal touch. It's sometimes depressing to learn how long people spend time on any given application, right? So if you think about how many hours you're going to do to put your application together, these applications are reviewed fairly quickly. So your personal statement may be read in a couple minutes, right? As they're looking through all the other parts of your application, they're going to be reading your personal statement for 2 to 3 minutes, and they may spend no more than 10 minutes on your application, right? Because if you can just count up the number of applications and the number of people who have to review these, there's a lot of information to kind of go through. That can be very distressing. So the other point on your personal statement is make sure that it's readable, right? Make sure that someone else other than you has read it and has gone through and looked at it. It is not the time to have any sloppiness, right? So misspellings, miscapitalization, all of those things, if they're there, they only serve to distract people, and they only serve to bring the wrong kind of attention to your application. So make sure somebody has read it. Maybe even 2 or 3 people have read it for you, to kind of make sure that it is both written in a clear way, and it is written in a way that it is free of any of these kind of errors. And then the last thing, and I'll stop, and then love to hear kind of your feedback and your thoughts in terms of some of these things. It's sometimes tempting to go longer than a page. I think you can actually introduce a personal statement that's longer than a page. You need to keep it to 1 page. So as you're uploading it, make sure that it stays within that 1 page part. Your application has, like, as we go through each one of these applications, we know where the personal statement is, and we want to see a personal statement in 1 page, as opposed to a page and a half or a page and a quarter. You'll have to find your words that only take up that amount of space. So let me pause there, see what you guys have in terms of questions or thoughts or feedback or anything like that. I'm happy to try to answer or do any follow-up.
Dr. J, you say you address in case we haven't matched before, we should address our attempts. So how detailed should we put in text the reasons we believe we haven't matched, or how should we approach this part?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sorry, remind me your name again, because I only see half of your face.
Oh, sorry. So,
okay.
Hi, it's Maria Male.
Maria, okay. I thought it was you, but I couldn't see most of your face. So, Maria, that's a great question. So, I don't think you need to address why you didn't get in, right? The question really is what's happened in the last year that makes you more competitive this year. This only applies to the places that you've applied before. So if you've applied there before, that's the case. If you've never applied there, they don't necessarily know that you haven't applied. Do you follow what I'm saying?
So not all the programs will know what attempt is this. Like only the programs I have applied before will know that this is my second attempt or so.
Gotcha. So I'm just going to make it up. I know this is not true, but I'm not particularly strong in math. So let's just start there. So let's say if you apply to 10 programs and you didn't get into those 10 programs, right? And then you chose in the second year to apply to 15 other programs and the overlap is 0, then don't bring it up at all, right?
Okay.
Because they won't know and it's not relevant to them, and you shouldn't bring up that you tried with these 10 other programs and they didn't rank you highly enough to get in, and now you're applying for these 15 programs, because then they'll start to think, these other 10 programs, they didn't want Maria, so what's wrong with her? I think she looks pretty good, but obviously I'm missing something about, she likes to beat up children or kittens or something like that, and so therefore, I must really kind of be missing something, right? So don't bring it up. But if you're applying to those 10 programs, and then the next year you're applying to 15 additional programs, but there's 25 programs altogether, and 10 of those are going to be repeat, what they're going to be specifically interested in hearing from you is like what's different in that. And I can't remember in ERAS whether you're allowed to use one personal statement or more than one personal statement, but if you are, and I think you are, I would make sure that you have a personal statement that addresses not your deficiencies, in the sense that I know you didn't like me because this, but since in the last 12 months, this is what I've been able to accomplish. It gives them the opportunity to start to think a little bit about what you've done with this last year to make yourself a more competitive applicant.
Okay, so it's better to have 2 personal statements in that case.
In the case that I just described, if there is going to be some overlap.
Great, thank you, Dr. J.
And in general, I think we come across a few international medical graduates who are applying to multiple specialties. So there's definitely opportunity to put more than one personal statement and then assign them to programs depending on what you're applying to. So not that I never advocate for applying to more than one specialty personally, but ERAS doesn't stop you from doing that.
Yeah, you can even upload 100 personal statements per program. Like, it's up to you, but most people just have one per specialty.
Right. One question I come across pretty frequently is, so how much attention do reviewers usually pay to reading personal statements versus CVs? Because, the personal statement sometimes turns into like a narrative, a reading off the CV without much additional, information. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It should not summarize. So how do I put this? So that's a great point, Omar. As you can imagine, throughout the course of the year, someone like me or many of the other program directors will have a pretty busy day job, right? And so when it comes to reading some of these applications, and I would favor a fair number of those applications, I end up tending to read either towards the end of the day or in the evening, right? So, and I'm going through applications we receive, as you know, a lot of applications. We receive somewhere on the order of about 3,800 applications, right? So for our spots. And so that becomes almost a time where I'm going through this, and the two things that will make me, let's say, not as happy, right, is if there's a letter of recommendation that says, let's say someone did an experience, let's say they were, they did an experience for the first 2 weeks, and the attending wrote a letter of recommendation, and then the next 2 weeks it was a different attending, but it was essentially the same rotation, and the letters look almost identical because you're the same student, same time period, same discipline, and it was literally the same. So I've learned nothing new by reading two letters of recommendations from that point of view, or if you're just simply restating on your personal statement what's already in your CV. And so I may have skipped dinner with my wife to read your application, or I may have not gone to my kid's soccer game because I needed to read your application. And I'm already kind of not in the best of moods reading your application. And now you've wasted a little bit of my time. And so now I'm not in the best of moods right now reading your application, right? I just want to put you in the frame of mind of sometimes the people who are reading that, because they're not oftentimes looking to give you the benefit of the doubt. They're oftentimes trying to get through an extraordinary amount of work. And so the way to do that, just as Omar has described, is you need to be thinking about the application not as fulfilling each individual piece, but think of it as kind of an entire narrative. There's pieces to this. This is like, anybody like jigsaw puzzles, right? Each piece in and of itself reveals the larger picture, right? And so that's what you're trying to do. This is an incredibly important piece, but it's a non-redundant piece. And so you want to make sure there is going to be some, obviously you can't tell an entirely new story, but you need to be able to take any of the information that I just described and do it in a different, more interesting way so that I can learn from that, or synthesize it in a way that I couldn't pick up from your CV. Do you follow what I'm saying? So that it allows me to kind of take where you've been, and then where are you going? And so you don't need to spend a lot of time telling me where you've been. Your CV has I don't need to know which papers. I don't need to know all of the papers re-summarized in your personal statement, because if it's easily seen on your CV, don't tell me about each one of the papers. But I may not be able to figure out like where you're going, with this, because after, let's say, internal medicine training, in the work that you've done already, it's clear that, or it may be obvious that you're interested in endocrinology, but I'm not sure about that. So, so help me understand, like, because these are the patients that I was exposed to, because of the work that I've been doing, I'm very passionate about internal medicine, and I anticipate that I'd like to be able to do research in academic medicine or clinical medicine that will focus on patients who have endocrine disorders, because I believe I can serve those patients well, given my experiences before, coupled with the experiences I'm sure I will get at your institution. So, I'm just giving you some broad brushstrokes, but again, it's weaving, taking those nuggets, highly summarizing them, and then tell me where you're going from there.
One thing I've actually taken out of people's personal statements and asked them not to put in is where somebody wrote, "When I was a child, my mom took me to the hospital on her rounds."
Well, it happened to me, and you aware me of that, Omar. Thank you.
Because I think culturally, that's like bring your son to work or bring your daughter to work in a hospital typically is culturally really problematic. So I do wonder with stuff like that sometimes people might see it in a negative light.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, because sometimes it also raises an issue that I think Omar was I think there are multiple reasons why that's a great idea to kind of omit, but it sometimes also reminds people, like, and it doesn't matter what culture you're coming from. It can even be that, here in the United States, but like, are you doing this because you want to do it, right? I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, and you guys know this already, like, medicine is hard. And, and in the last 16 months, it's never been more difficult in terms of doing what we do. At the same time, like we want to make sure that the motivation is internal, because if the motivation is external, I'm doing this because I'm fulfilling my mom's dream, I'm fulfilling my dad's dream, right? It's hard to do this year after year if that's the motivation that's driving you. It's, you know, it has to be from within. And so some of the things that we'll see is if we get the sense that you're doing it for somebody else, and you're doing it because you're trying to bring, you know, your happiness to your parents, to your brother, to your relatives, to your wife, whatever, that can be a small red flag that we will see.
Dr. J, one question.
Of course. All right.
As you mentioned, we know it is important to express our interest and the reason why we have our interest in the specific specialty we are applying to. As IMGs, is it also important to explain why we're interested to read in the US, or it is not that important?
So I guess there's potentially, I think it's sometimes important to get a sense as to where you see yourself in the future. And what I mean by that is that if you see yourself practicing in the United States, I would say that you intend to, you know, serve the patients of this country, only because it does help. You know, a lot of places are looking to not only train people, but they're also looking to continue to populate people in their own and care for people in the communities that they serve. And so that becomes oftentimes particularly important. There may be some institutions that may have mandates that say that, you know, if we know for, or they're not mandates, they may have preferences that might say, like, if we know that 10 of these people in our incoming intern class are going to get trained and then they're going to go back to their home country, that doesn't serve their larger motives particularly well, right? I mean, in a way, you should think about this in the training programs, right? So, you know, I trained here at this institution, and I know Omar did as well, and now we're both attendings, right? And so, in a way, in different industries, what we would say, these are essentially like these are like our employee development programs, right? So what we do is we take people who have really promising talent, we train them for a period of time, and then we make them productive faculty members. Now, it's true we can't hire everybody we train, and there's no way, and there's never been an expectation that we would do it. But there's also an expectation that the number of people that we do train will either continue to serve in our community somewhere in the, you know, in some parts of it. For us, it's a little bit less important. Other places it might be more important. But our first and foremost responsibility is to make sure that, I'll just speak for myself, that MGH has a strong pipeline of individuals who are coming through, who are going to continue to keep MGH at the leadership position that it enjoys in the United States. And we do that by bringing world-class faculty, world-class talent from all over the world into our training programs, with the hopes that they will ultimately, a subset of them will stay and continue to work here. And so it's sometimes helpful to know, like, what you're, you know, if you're going to stay here, whether you really intend to go back. Some places are totally fine with that. Other places may struggle or may place a lower priority on people that they know who are going to train here and then want to leave shortly after they get their training. So that's how I would kind of address that. I don't necessarily think that they need to know almost at the specifics that you were describing your question. I think I would try to avoid that, and I don't think that that's what I would really kind of delve in to too much detail in your personal statement. Again, these are oftentimes questions that you're just describing, Jorge, are questions that oftentimes come up in the interview, which is, tell me how do you anticipate your career is going to look in 10 to 15 years, right? That's a kind of a standard question that's open-ended enough to get a sense as to, like, where you're thinking you know, what kind of practice you're going to have, what location that's going to be in, you know, and that it does provide, that's a question that's relatively easy to ask, fairly open-ended, that allows us to kind of then figure out a number of phenotypes of the candidate that's in front of us.
Right. Interesting.
I'm going to reiterate that point that, the rest of your application, the CV and the letters basically talk mostly about what you have achieved so far. And if you have a future vision, and I don't suggest that, people talk about, I want to cure cancer, but what change do you want to bring about in the world with your work? I think the personal statement may be a decent platform, at least part of it, to talk about that. And that also allows the program. In my case, when I was applying, my background was in large data outcomes research, and the program was looking for somebody like that at the time that I was applying. And I think so. The personal statement, in addition to the interview, is a way to capture the attention of the reader and basically make your case, make the sale that you're somebody that they should invest in. And hiring you doesn't just benefit you; it also benefits the program and the institution in some way beyond just the service that you provide as an intern, as a resident.
Mhm.
Well, I'm afraid we're at the bottom of the hour. It was nice seeing all of you again. I think as we wrap up this academic year, I just wanted to say that it was just such a delight to get to know you, mostly through your questions and getting an opportunity to learn about kind of your own stories and where you're going. And so well, I know that the program itself formally ends. If there's things that I can be of help with, please, I'm an email away. So just let me know what I can do to be helpful. I wish you all of the very best of luck. I know that this is not an easy process, but I hope that some of the questions that have come up during these sessions and the answers that I and Omar have provided you give you a little bit of a better insight into the process and more importantly, some opportunities to kind of strategize on putting together your application. So thank you for letting me be part of this group.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Doctor.
Great. Thanks so much.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Stop.